This is a mission requirements review through our microsatellite water project. Of course, we depict mission objectives, concept of operations, and impact on indigenous communities in North Canadian and Uganda, of course, as a goal. We consider project management perspectives and so on as follows. But let's begin with introducing who we are. We are a group of Egyptian engineering students of wide variety of majors who were chosen this program with a group of scholars to whom we're really thankful. We chose a descriptive name to this program, CEUWM, standing for Canada, Egypt, Uganda Water Mission. And here's our presentation outline. We begin with introduction and a brief mission overview. Then we refer to impact analysis, followed by mission requirements and design analysis. Then we head to project management, and we start with the recommendations and next steps. The CEUWM is a microsatellite mission with the objective of assessing the health of coastal and inland waters from northern Canada and Uganda. And our program is a 3-week program. We're intended for a proposed 4-year program with the subgroups of program management team, mission design team, and impact team. And here's our team. Which is a chain of 3 sub-teams working collaboratively to achieve the ultimate goals of this mission, employing fair and just methods of collaboration where all team members have a seat at the table and, of course, no voice is ignored. Coming to the point, the water problem, what are we even trying to solve? In the next slides, we depict real issues of indigenous communities. Here we see northern Canadian communities suffering from they don't have good access to healthy water. But first, we go to land acknowledgement. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many indigenous nations, like area known as Tkaramto, which is now home to many First Nations. Also acknowledge the current treaty holders, and which is like an agreement to peacefully share and care for the Great Lakes region. Now, we see as depicted, there are about 835 water advisories around us. So, the issues are Northern Canadian. For instance, 58 long-term water advisories remain open, which affects daily life, like bathing, cooking, cleaning, and cause flu-like symptoms from drinking the water without boiling. Also, we see that reserves fall under the jurisdiction of the federal government, but they doesn't monitor all the water going into building from cisterns and wells. Good considered Niskantaiga First Nation has been on a long-term boil advisory since 1995. Heading to Uganda in sub-Saharan Africa, we see there's the issues. 7 million Ugandans lack access to safe water, and then 28 million do not have access to improved sanitation facilities. They work for 6 hours daily to have access to water, and they in rural areas cannot have their voices heard. Nevertheless, there are a lot of diseases that affect people from poor water quality. Good to consider that Uganda has 45% of Victoria Lake, which is one of Africa's most important water sources in its territory. So came this mission. So why do we think the world needs this mission? We change education by learning on the job through an engineering project, and measure impacts and leverage transparent decision making through the mission and with stakeholders. We also provide water quality measurements in Northern Canadian communities, comparable by those in the communities. And as a secondary goal, we provide SMS in Northern communities operated by communities. And what's new in this year's efforts, we provide water quality data to Uganda communities and maybe other potential communities in the future. So our mission objectives in brief for now, but in more detail later on. The main goal is we provide regional water quality data for Northern Canadian and Uganda communities. We provide alerts to community members and configurable data reportings depending on sensor information over 24 hours. We also provide simple messaging service, and we ensure that communities are involved and their voices are heard. So we have some questions to consider. We'll walk through our mission, our process. Are our mission requirements appropriate and complete? Does this appear to constitute a mission? We have a mission concept, have a program structure and impact structure that suggests this could be successful. And now we head to impact team.
Hello, everyone. Here I will talk about the impact of our mission. First, I need to present myself. My name is Mohammed Tawheed. Anyone can call me Tawheed because in this project we have a lot of Mohammed's name. I'm a senior in navigation science, which is a college in Venezuela. Yusuf, can you give me the share screen, please? Thanks. Sorry about it. First of all, we will talk about why we choose Uganda rather than any country. Second, we will talk about the impact analysis. Third, we will talk about the communication strategy. First of all, what about us and who are us? We are here to ensure that those who will be impacted by the project have a voice during every step of the design process by bringing the community's experience and desires forward and working to keep them at the front at the forefront of our minds, ensuring that the mission remain as a cooperation rather than a one-size-fits-all perceptions. Our goal is to ensure that the community is involved in making decisions by working with them and solving the water problems, adding a new area to the mission Uganda, complete other unfinished tasks from last year project, leaving a positive, sustainable impact on society. Then I will give more to Karim.
Now, before heading to selecting sites to apply a mission in, we will have a look at some of water parameters that we are expected to be testing, which does vary based on the polluting act that does happen in every country. I'm sorry, the microphone turned off. So these parameters can be classified into some physical and chemical parameters. Looking at the physical properties, some important measures are like observing the presence of any suspended solids, monitoring the temperature, turbidity, and color, besides testing its taste and odor. On the other hand, the chemical parameters should include, firstly, testing the pH level. As we have said before, some acts may increase acidity, like mining. Ammonia as well, especially if it's unionized, it can be toxic. Dissolved oxygen, which is vital for aquatic organisms to survive. Concentration, blue algae, which can reduce nitrogen and carbon in water. Chloride, which if present in high concentrations, it can also negatively impact the aquatic organisms. And conductivity, which may sound weird, but it's like a test that can determine the concentrations of solutions in water and detecting contaminants. We do monitor these parameters based on acceptable ranges that are set by the FEPA and WHO standards. Okay, so we are done with important water parameters to monitor. Now let's kick into choosing which sites to apply the mission in. So beside the water mission being implemented in Canada, we wanted to extend the mission to reach Egypt and some African countries. But the problem would be the high cost and the increased difficulty of the mission. So we need to limit our sites to the countries in most need of this mission, and that has water sources that does impact higher numbers of people. So as we can see in this map, it does show the level of water contamination in Africa, and it's clear that the middle part of Africa, especially on the equatorial line, they are suffering from higher levels of contamination. And what makes them a priority as well is that some of them are considered water source countries for many countries in the upper part of Africa. Therefore, we will limit our sites to African countries on the equatorial line, including Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, Gabon, Congo, and Democratic Congo. If we look at Uganda, we will find that their main water sources are like lakes, like Victoria Lake, rivers as the Nile River, beside rainfall and some groundwater. Problem of Uganda is the poor sanitation there, the increased level of urbanization and wastes from agriculture. So to test their water, we should focus mainly on nitrates, phosphates, and bacterial infection. You can see that we choose exact sites where pollution is known to be more severe. In Somalia, they depend mainly on groundwater sources. And like Uganda, they have even more lack of sanitation, which causes waterborne diseases like cholera that does threaten their lives. That's why it's most important to test bacterial infection and microbes in water. In Kenya, they depend mainly on Lake Victoria and Tana River. They suffer mainly from the polluted agricultural runoff, sewage, and wastes from industries, beside that there is some mining in some locations. So it is important to test for nitrates, phosphates, pesticides, and pH levels. In Gabon, the Ogo River is dominant. Most pollution in Gabon comes from the excessive chemical use in agriculture and logging. So testing for nitrates and phosphates is a good option. Next slide, please. In Congo and Democratic Congo, most water sources come from springs in dense forests. It does have Africa's largest freshwater resources, but unfortunately, it has very low rates of clean drinking water, and only 46% of the population there do have access to clean water. Next slide, please. Next. So in Congo, we should look for testing pH levels, bacteria, nitrates, and phosphates. Now returning to our main point, which countries or country we want to apply our mission in. We are seeking to extend to the 6 countries on the equatorial line, but due to the increased level of difficulty, we are demanded by other teams to choose only a single country. So we put some deciding factors to help us choose one of them. And these factors include, for example, the difficulty of the mission itself. If the country is hard to implement the mission in, the country will be excluded right away, as the ease of implementation is something mandatory for us. The other 3 factors are comparing the water contamination levels, the availability of the internet, and which country does impact more water sources of other countries. So firstly, talking about the difficulty of the mission, as we said before, Somalia, Congo, Democratic Congo, they all depend mainly on groundwater, which requires having multiple sites at random locations in these countries, which means we will be using more sensors and more labor to implement the mission. So this does make the mission more costly and harder. So the 3 countries will be excluded from our mission. Now only 2 countries are left, Kenya and Uganda, so we need to choose one of them. Comparing water contamination levels in both of them, we will see that they do both suffer from high levels of contamination, but the case is worse in Uganda. So here's a point for Uganda. Now for the internet availability, we will see that a larger percentage of Kenya's population do use internet and with much faster broadband speed. So here's an advantage for Kenya. Until now, they are both equal. So the deciding factor will be which country has water sources that is also shared with other countries and will affect them as well. And what will help us decide that, we should see which of Kenya, Uganda share one of Africa's most important water sources, like the Nile River and Lake Victoria. So if we look at Lake Victoria, which is the 2nd largest water source in Africa, that supplies water to around 10 million people, we will find that there is echo in the sound. Okay. We will find that Uganda shares about 45% of the surface of the lake, while Kenya share only 6%, which means that Uganda has a higher possibility to impact the lake. The largest water source in Africa is the Nile River, providing water to around 300 million people in 11 countries. Uganda is considered one of the source countries of the Nile River through the White Nile, while Kenya has no contribution in this water. Therefore, our final choice is Uganda, and we recommend monitoring in 2 sites, one in Lake Victoria and the other in the Nile River. But if we have to only choose one site, we can go for the Lake Victoria because it's considered a source for Nile River as well. let's not forget that originally we wanted all African countries on the equatorial line to involve in this mission. So we hope that next year teams can put this into consideration. Now the impact analysis with Karim Sami.
Okay, the first thing to do is to define an action plan. The next slide. And this action plan could be a point design, trade study, or any part of manufacturing process. And we also have to know that not every single action must be relevant to all types of impacts, which we will mention later. We also have our assessment tools, which will help us. Then we have to summarize our results, and then goes our critique process. Next slide. The critique process is the process at which, after we perform an assessment on some impacts, it will be summarized into a package, which includes the data and reasoning used to determine the impact. These will then be made available to the full project team for the purpose of critiquing, either through their own personal lens or within the team using personas for the stakeholders, which will be developed early in the program. Next slide. The impacts that we are going to talk about are community impact, which includes health, social, and economic impacts, environmental impact, participants' impact, and technological and political impacts, where most of these impacts were worked on last year by the other teams. We just added health and economic impacts. And we also added some details to the SDGs and the tarot cards of tech, which will be defined later. For the community impact, the assessments could be done either through communication, either directly through communication between the design team and the communities, or indirectly through the SDG targets or the tarot cards of tech, which are a set of provocation designed to help creators more fully consider the impact of technology. Going to the communication, we want to maximize the involvement of the community members in the decision-making process and have a transparent relationship with the community and other stakeholders to help us make decisions and choices. During the time of operation, we want to know how accurate the water quality data is, and if there are any direct or indirect impacts of this mission on their health and financial state. Next. We have the SDG targets, which is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and how our mission impacts those goals, where the SDG is not a direct method to measure the impact, but it helps us know the different types of impacts that could be related to our mission. For the social impacts, our first social impact is reducing inequalities. The ability to have access to clean water for northern communities in Canada, like the rest of the Canadians, will reduce the inequality within the country, and the increase in water and education infrastructure in Uganda leads to equality among all the countries. Our second related goal in the social impacts is gender equality. Since we want to create equality among all the people involved in the mission, including the community as part of our goal, we want to involve everyone in decision-making and discussions regardless of their age, gender, or experience level, and therefore creating a positive impact. For the health impacts, we have two goals, which are clean water and sanitation, and good health and well-being. There is no doubt that increasing access to clean water and sanitation contributes to achieving part of the targets of that goal by reducing water-related diseases, as lack of clean water supply, sanitation, and hygiene are major causes of spread of waterborne diseases in a community. For the economic impacts, we have decent work and economic growth and sustainable cities and communities. Of course, clean water has a central role in the development of cities, as a sustainable urban economy is dependent on the quality, reliability, and cost of water supply. And for the tarot cards of tech, in the next slide, the first card was the scandal card. And it asks about how could our product cause harm to the users. And the answer is inaccurate data which could harm the community by using water when it's not suitable, and that could lead to negative health effects. Our second card is the super fan, and it asks about the negative or positive impact that the community could cause. And the answer is wrong decisions taken due to lack of information, and that's why we need to train community and provide them with the information they need to be able to have a positive impact on the mission. And in the next slide, we have the environmental impact. And it's one of the most critical impacts that we analyze. And we try to analyze how these impacts are related to the United Nations SDGs. And we identified 4 goals relevant to the mission. Using the United Nations SDG goals, we seek to understand more about these impacts, about how these impacts affect the community. The first 3 goals are clean water and sanitation, life on land, and life below water. Poor water quality has a very strong impact on aquatic wildlife, particularly fish and plants, since presence of contaminants and redundancy or shortage of nutrients and some natural water components can reduce the variety and hardness of organisms living in the state's water. Water pollution also affects agricultural productivity and human health, since research has proved that poor water quality resulting from waste discharge into rivers negatively affects crops, animals, and the soil itself. Our last goal was responsible production and consumption, and it was related to the Mother Nature card from the tarot cards of tech. And the answer to this card was that the new raw material extraction, materials manufacture, and product manufacture could have a negative impact on the environment. So the impact team will use a life cycle analysis to determine the possible environmental effects that the design parts might create. As we are also planning on inspecting the raw material extraction and manufacturing process to ensure that we use the most environmentally friendly products that cause minimum threat to nature. And now Omar is going to talk about participants' impacts, technological and political impacts.
Other important impact is participant impact. Participant here refers to the members of the design team. For analyzing the participant impact, we added the UN Sustainable Development Goal to the work done last year. Out of the 17 goals, quality education was the most relevant to participant impact. So one of the most important impacts that we hope this program produces is quality education and the personal growth for all the participants. We look to measure these effects through the use of self and peer evaluation, allowing room for participants to indicate how this program has impacted them and what personal growth has occurred. The criteria and assessment of performance for the sake of qualifying education will be done by peers, academics, experts, and members of the community. Rather than relying on strict test-based metrics, this process allows for the focus of education to shift and change from year to year, keeping in accordance with the wider needs of the community at large, while still offering assurance that participants are performing well. Last year, the team didn't have enough time to work on technological and political impacts, so this year we worked on them, starting with technological impact and starting with an important question: why do we need to assess the technological impact? There are many reasons, but the main reasons are the stakeholder expectations, which is a mismatch between stakeholder expectations and developer resources. Also, requirement definition. If the requirements are defined without fully understanding the resources required to accomplish needed technology development, then the program is at risk. Next slide. So how can we assess the technological impact? The first step is the determination of technology readiness level, TRL, or current level of maturity of all of the systems, subsystems, and the components required to meet the program requirements. There are 9 technology readiness levels. TRL1 is the lowest and TRL9 is the highest. As you could see in the pictures, TRL1 is the basic principle, observed and reported, and the highest one is TRL9, which is an actual system, flight proven through successful mission operations. Next slide. The second step is the determination of advancement degree of difficulties, AD2. So what is AD2? It's the AD2 is the AD2 quantifies at the first order the risk associated with the technology. It assesses technical cost and schedule risk against user-defined ranges. The questions are primarily associated with the existence of facilities, tools, materials, and skills. The questions are answered in terms of the difficulty in acquiring the elements based on a 9-level set of criteria. As you could see in the picture, the lowest level of risk the technology exists with no or only minor modification being required. The highest level of risk is the technology requires new development outside of any existing of experiment base. The TRL and the 82 are intended to be used together to perform an integrated technology assessment. The 82 uses the result of TRL as inputs. As such, they are linked together. However, TRL assessment can be performed without performing the 82 assessment. Next slide. One important implication of this mission is the political impacts. We could use surveys to analyze the type of impacts. A possible political impact is to strengthen the voice of civil society organizations and the communities that suffer from water quality problem by introducing Canadian society to the water quality problem that exists in north of Canada, and that may force the government to provide water quality facilities for these communities. The last potential impact is to increase the future cooperation between Canada and Uganda in the water fight. Next slide. So moving to the requirements, we have a big list of requirements, but here we have what we think is the most important ones. Actually, that's also what the team from last year also think, except for the last one. We added it this year. Starting with that, the community shall determine the desired goal and the intended outcome of the mission. We want to empower and make sure that all voices are heard. Also, the design team shall be the deciding factor of what is feasible for the mission scope. We want to ensure that the project is possible within the constraints that exist. The third one is that the design team shall reflect on their own bias and assumptions about the desires of the communities to ensure that the design team personal biases don't undermine the desires or goals of the communities. Proper compensation for community members in line with our values of taking into consideration the social impacts of our project and making sure that the communities know that we value their input. Also, the design team shall ensure that any work done within the community is performed by the members of the community, taking into consideration the social impacts of our project and realizing that we can have positive financial impact on the communities while also providing education. And the last new one that we added this year is that the design team shall provide educational communication to the general public regarding the mission and the crisis we are responding to. This requirement is for the political impact that we added this year. We want to strengthen the voice of the communities that suffer from water quality problems by introducing Canadian society to the water quality problems that exist in north of Canada, and that may put pressure on the government to provide water quality facilities for these communities. Moving to Muhammad Tawheed to talk about communication strategies.
Here I will talk about the communication strategy with Uganda. First of all, we have communication strategy plan. That plan for communication with your target audience, which include who we are talking to, the Uganda society and the Canadian society. Also, who we are talking to them, why we are talking to them, to empowering community by data, then then they actually be obtained the clean water facilities. When we will talk to them, we will talk to them when they need us. Last question, how we will talk to them? By all social ways. Here I will be more specifically about the social ways in the next. The strategy structure is contained of three mainly parts: Uganda team, Canadian team, and the community. We afford all the possible ways into Uganda team, for example, TV, websites, newspaper, phone and SMS, charities, and radio. Uganda team choose a suitable way to communicate with community, for example, SMS to send the new data to a community. Also, the community, if have any issue or new needs, they have ability to send these needs to the Uganda team. Canadian team sends the data to Uganda team, and Uganda team, if have any issue, to send back to Canadian team. So we have, when we talk about operation phase, we have two phases. First phase, that when they are ground station in Uganda, And second phase, if there isn't a ground station in Uganda. If there are a ground station in Uganda, sensor in lakes will send data to satellite, then satellite send data to the ground station in Uganda, then Uganda ground station sends the data to Uganda team. If there aren't a ground station in Uganda, sensor in lakes will send the data to satellite, then the data from satellite will send it to ground station, to Canadian team, to Uganda team. Then the Uganda team will communicate with the community. Another phase is the design phase. Actually, the difference in this phase, who will make the decision? Does the community have ability to make a decision, or only engineering who will make the decision? We need to empower the community to make the decision in engineering work. So this needs from community will be translated to design goal? No, it will be shape the design process to fit community need. We need also to make conversation with the community to build a relationship and learn them to make decision and then educate us so we can remold our design or reach the solution that work for all communities. First of all, I need to illustrate some statistic about infrastructure in Middle Africa, then in Uganda, to illustrate that this strategy will work or not. First, internet adoption visits the population in Middle Africa. 24% in Middle Africa have access to internet. Also, social media, 8% only have access to social media. So social media will not be an efficient way to communicate with people in Uganda or Middle Africa, but it will be a proper way to communicate internationally. Mobile connectivity, we have here a good number, 55% of population of Middle Africa have access to mobile. Some statistic about Uganda. Number of mobile connectivity or number of cellular phone in Uganda, 27 million, which is 58% of the population in Uganda. Also, the internet user in Uganda, 30% of Uganda have access to internet. Also, social media, 6%, like I mentioned before, that is not a suitable way to communicate with Uganda. Last one and the most efficient one is radio. Radio is the most popular medium in Uganda. People can listen to radio at home or with their friends or with their relatives. 41 million users use radio, which occupy 87% of Uganda population. But the main question here, if we need to have a return mechanism to communicate with the Uganda team, what will be the solution? Before I answer this question, I need to illustrate more about the radio, some statistics about the radio in Uganda. First, what is the number of radio stations in Uganda? There have 309 radio stations, which is a big number. And like we saw in the curve here, the curve is grown. Also here, this figure presents radio station rating by region, every region in Uganda, which is a popular radio station. For example, North, Mega FM, Mid-East, E-Top FM, Central, Capital FM. This figure also provides geographical distribution of radio station, which is Uganda have 134 districts. This represents some of districts and what is the number of ground station radio station have. The last figure is the most popular radio station overall in Uganda, which is Capital FM. I think with this ways we can communicate with Uganda, but not all people in real areas, for example. So the last solution is to use charities. Uganda have a lot of charities, but I will specify some of them, which is specified in water mission. First of all, United Nations water. The objective of United Nations is to provide policy and decision makers at all levels with reliable, easy, accessible, and comprehensive analysis water system to make informed decision for sanitation, drinking water, and hygiene. Another charity is Uganda Water Project, which serves 375,000 people in Uganda. Also, we have Uganda Water Sanitation Network, which serves 8 regions. Another charity is Age and Development Network, which area of activity, early childhood development, economic development, civil society, education, and health. Another international charity is Oxfam International. Oxfam is a British-founded confederation of 21 independent charitable organizations focused on the alleviation of global poverty, founded in 1942 and led by Oxfam International. What they do, one of the most things they do, water and sanitation. The last one is Future Builder Uganda. Future Builder Uganda is a charity working to help relieve and assist people in a small village in Uganda. So I talk here about how to Uganda team will targeting the community or will communicate with the community. But what about how the community will communicate with Uganda team? First, I need to answer the question about what is the return mechanism of radio station. The challenge in radio station is one way. So what about the return mechanism will be, or we can questioning in another way, how we can use the radio for better communication and judgment. Actually, when you talk about radio station return mechanism, there is not a practical way to have return mechanism, but we have another solution to receive feedback. For example, postal services. One of the main postal services in Uganda is Posta Uganda, having an extensive network of postal delivery outlined down to sub-country level. Mail is delivered to over 70,000 post boxes all over the country. Another way, like I mentioned before, that Uganda have 60% of its population have access to a mobile cellular phone. So they can also send SMS to Uganda team. The last way they can use is by using charities. Charities can use any way to communicate with Uganda team or to communicate with the community. So there are some questions here. Who we need to train? I mean by that, the Uganda team, who we need to train. Our priority to train people who work in charities. Second priority to train people who work in communication and telecommunication services. Also to train people who work in community services. How will the train will be? Online train section or offline train section? The offline train section might require a Canadian to travel to Uganda to organize some sort of train. Who will fund the train? It will be a cooperation between Canadian government and Uganda government, which states that a Canadian section from trainer and Canadian will be funded by Canadian, and the Uganda section, like trainee and employee, will be funded by Uganda. So that will be lead to a small diagram to summarize all the data. Uganda communication team and the community. Uganda communication team, if they need to communicate with the community, they have radio, SMS, charities, and website. And the community, if they need to communicate with Uganda, they have SMS, post, charities, and email. From this process, if we have a new community need, it will be characterized by Uganda management team and Canadian team. This new community need will be translated to new requirements. This new requirement will shape the design process to fit the community needs. Also, we had the feedback to Uganda community team and then feedback to Canadian team. That's all about communication and strategy. Are there any questions at this part? Second, I will talk about the websites that we made. Here, like we see, we make a website that present our mission and what we do. First of all, that is our new slogan. SEUWM, Canadian Egypt Uganda Water Mission. That is our vision, our impact in Canada, our impact in Egypt, and our impact in Uganda. This is a tab here to the update. One of the updates that we updated now, the summer-based program on YouTube. We can tab and go to the YouTube channel live. Also our team, we have 3 teams: mission team, project team, and impact team, and the main team, York team. If we tab in York team, for example, we have here Dr. Franz and Olivia and Reggie. Last one is to contact us if anyone need to contact with us. This tab will not prepare it yet because that we will put our information, for example, that the presentation we make today and our PDFs. That is all about the website. Thanks. I need to go to my project team or mission team.
Yes, as a mission team, we are going to talk first about the phases of our mission. We start with a pre-phase, which is phase 0. It's sometimes already ready, but in a project like a CubeSat, it needs to be done. So this includes focusing on the technical aspects of the project, the management plan, the group project agreement, and building partners' interest. The first actual phase is phase A. It's a relatively low-cost paper exercise designed to expand the basic idea and confirm that the project is feasible. So during this phase, the principal investigators shall define the overall experiment plan. So this phase includes technical specifications, coordination board, and simple simulations. The next phase is phase B. The main purpose of phase B is to convert the conceptual idea from phase A into a prototype model, upon which further investigations can be performed to confirm the feasibility of the concept before building an actual space qualified hardware. The initial prototype model, sometimes referred to as engineering model. It can use non-space qualified materials or procedures. It isn't constrained by either weight or size restrictions, but it should prove the functionality of any special components or materials that would eventually be encrypted into a flight model. So this phase includes technical modeling, designing, simulations, and low-level feasibility. Then phases C and D, they are usually combined. The purpose of these phases is to convert the outcome of phase B into a fully space-qualified model that would be suitable for either space activities or the actual flight. So they include technical specifications, management project, technical tests and validations, partner financial investments. Finally, we come to phases E and F. They are also combined phases. They are associated with the launch campaign and the post-launch activities, tests and preparation. So these phases include launch preparation, ground relay, and start of the launch. Finally, as a mission requirement review, we are now between phases A and B.
Hello, everyone. First, I'd like to acknowledge the huge efforts of last year's team on which we based our work. Now we are going to go through the concept of operations. The CEUWM mission will have the usual phases of the operation expected for a CubeSat, namely the launch and early operation phase, which is the commissioning, routine operations, and end-of-life disposal activities. Well, first, in the low Earth or in the early orbit life phase, the spacecraft will separate from the launch vehicle space station. First, we will power on, deploy the antennas, and await first contact with the ground station. It will then go through systems checkout to ensure communications and power systems are functioning as expected, commissioning will involve testing the space segment with the ground components prior to deploying the ground-based water sensors and SMS-like devices to their final locations and ensuring system end-to-end performance in orbit. In the routine operations, there will be three primary modes of operation: the spacecraft monitoring and control, water sensor data collection and dissemination, which is spreading the information widely, the SMS-like message collection and dissemination. In this figure, or the following figure shows the overall concept of operations for the routine mission operations. From left to right, the CubeSat will communicate with the ground sensor suites when flying over them. The spacecraft will transmit a beacon to sensors when over Canada and Uganda using the low-range payload transceiver. When the ground sensor suite, the low-range transceiver sees the beacon from the spacecraft, it will transmit its stored water quality data, which will be stored on the spacecraft. When the spacecraft flies over the community ground stations, the spacecraft health and payload data will be downloaded and the spacecraft commands will be sent. For the secondary payload, the SMS-like payload, which also uses the low-range transceiver, when the spacecraft flies over any ground low-range transceivers for user SMS-like devices, these devices will respond with a handshake, and the spacecraft will then send any stored SMS-like messages for those devices. For the concept of operations in the SMS, the mission will support two levels of priority of messages: those messages that are normal priority and high priority, whether as part of the water monitoring or SMS payloads, will be stored on the spacecraft after collection and will be downlinked on the first served basis to the ground stations for water data and to the end users for SMS messages. Both mission datasets will also support high priority messaging in case of detecting any water quality anomaly, or in the case of an SMS user triggering a personal emergency message, like when people in North Canada go hunting and they suffer from an emergency situation and they need to send a message real fast. This will be considered a high alert message. Once these messages are received by the spacecraft, they will be sent as priority to any SMS terminal designed to receive the alerts, and all ground stations as a priority over normal messages. In the mission requirements, there are main topics. These are the main topics that we did include as requirements. First, the regional water quality data for Northern Canadian and Uganda communities. Alerting the community members in case of any emergency, sensor information over 24 hours, symbol messaging service, which is a secondary payload suggested by last year's team. We decided to keep it. Configurable data reporting, joint community operations, in order to make community members get involved in the discussion where they can have a seat at the table with other stakeholders. There are some other project management requirements, some impact requirements and regulatory requirements in the spreadsheet. You're more than welcome to ask us about them, and hopefully we can answer. So we're going to go through the key requirements. We're going to start with the top level mission requirements. First, the mission shall provide regional water quality data to predominantly indigenous communities in Northern Canada over the expected mission lifetime. Historically, the Northern Canadian communities have had to ensure worse water quality than other Canadian communities, and may be less empowered in discussions about water quality than other communities. Same goes for Uganda. So we added a sub-goal for the main mission objective. The mission shall provide water quality data to Uganda communities in need of the same functionality, but it will be on a less frequent basis. The rotation of the satellite is idle most of its time, so if we can use satellite by increasing its duty cycle to cover more range, this would be good. The mission shall provide an SMS alert system to Northern Canadian and Uganda communities, which is considered also as a secondary goal of this mission. The routine water quality data shall be provided as periodic reports with support of reporting different levels of detail in water quality for the Northern Canadian communities, which contain the levels of contaminants and overall quality at intervals conforming to the community members' typically daily routine. As for Uganda, there will also be reports, but on less frequent basis, since the satellite will be passing over it less frequently, which will be discussed on the orbital analysis. The mission shall have a lifetime or a timeline such that the launch is within 3 years of the program kickoff. The mission implementation team shall work with the communities during the mission operational lifetime to ensure defining a path to continued service after the end-of-life phase as suitable for the community. Now moving on to the satellite requirements, also some of the key satellite requirements. The satellite shall deorbit within a maximum of 4 years based on this year's requirement. The satellite shall collect water quality data from all sensors within the area of interest over the course of 24 hours, which ensures high coverage and frequent updates on the quality of water in the affected areas, supposing there is a change in water quality due to anything. The satellite shall turn off non-essential systems when not in the scope of Canada or Uganda, those that we are concerned about this year, as the systems are only servicing a specific area of the planet that only makes up a small part of the orbit. Non-essential systems will be turned off to preserve power. The satellite shall store high and low priority messages until download link. These SMS messages will only be transmitted to the area that pertains to the message, contents. Message will be stored until we pass over the specific area that we need. The satellite shall have a total mass of 1.1 kilograms, which includes a margin of 20%. The spacecraft power consumption shall support a minimum orbital average payload operation of 2.22 watts and peak payload operation of 3.22, since we have taken into consideration the increase of the power budget as we added Uganda as a sub goal. These data might not be accurate enough. Maybe it may be specific though, since we needed to add a stake in the ground and the preliminary design can continue from it. The satellite shall have an onboard data storage capacity for water quality reports for 7 days maximum, and also for SMS messaging data for 60 days, since based on the computer budget on each orbit, satellite collects a minimum of storage for satellite, allows storage for multiple orbits in cases where downlink is not possible every orbit. The satellite shall collect a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 8 water quality measurements from each sensor per day, depending on its station. The ground sensor receiver station shall be able to communicate with up to 10 sensors simultaneously. The uplink times for two or more sensors could overlap, and satellite shall be able to receive them in real time. And now we move over to the ground segment requirements. We are also taking the key requirements, but there are more requirements in the spreadsheet. The ground station shall have a design lifetime of 4 years. Same goes for the water sensor units and the SMS units. These ground segment units should outlive the satellite, as it could prove useful for communities to have after satellite end of life, as well as continued operation throughout the time, where the manufacturer warranties of all ground station parts must surpass 4 years of installation lifetime, or else this will have to be verified by means of a physical model. The ground station unit shall download, link, and process with a level 0 processing raw water quality data from the satellite. Having the ground station process the raw data transmitted by the satellite reduces the required processing and data storage load on the satellite itself, and provides access to both raw and processed data to the communities in the event that either data type is desired. The ground station units shall process incoming raw water quality data into comma-separated values files. Makes it easy to view the contents of the file directly, as well as allows for easy input into a spreadsheet for configurable data reporting, and would use much lower data storage. The ground station units shall provide water quality data over configurable time intervals when requested. The ground station units shall only download link high priority data when the power state is limited. Some cases the power state is limited and the high priority data, for instance, is a must. So we need to download them in case when the power state is limited. All the ground-based equipment shall send priority alerts to the community in case the equipment failure at the earliest download link opportunity. In case of sensor or station equipment failure, an alert will be sent to the communities affected by the failure as soon as possible, so as a replacement for effects can be performed before the data is potentially lost, as they need to know this is vital and important. Ground station units shall communicate with the spacecraft on amateur band radio frequencies. The amateur band radio frequencies only require an amateur radio license to use, and as such is much easier for communities to get rather than the commercial ones, which would impose a much larger financial burden. The SMS units shall communicate with the spacecraft on amateur band radio frequencies too. SMS units have human operators and as such are allowed to transmit and receive an amateur radio band anyway. So we have tried to sum up the requirements that we thought indispensable, but there are more in the spreadsheet if you'd like to go through it. Now we would like to go to the launch options with Mustafa. Thank you.
We will discuss now launch options. The key drivers for that are launch availability, launch cost, orbit options that cover Northern Canada and Uganda. Key parameters are inclination, local time of ascending node for sun-synchronous orbits. We have two common orbits to compare between them, sun-synchronous orbit and International Space Station orbit. The inclination of sun-synchronous orbit is 97.3087 degrees and its altitude is 500 kilometers. And for International Space Station orbit, its inclination is 51.64 degrees and its altitude is 420 kilometers. Why we choose this, the previous slide, please. Why we choose these orbits, why we didn't choose any orbits with high altitude, because the launch cost will be high for higher altitude orbits. And the orbital period for these two orbits is low. So stations can make more connections to the satellite per day. In this slide, we see the four locations of our ground stations in Northern Canada and Uganda. 3 ground stations are in Northern Canada and 1 ground station in Uganda, and their latitude and longitude for each one of them. In this slide, we can see the sun-synchronous orbit path over the chosen countries. SSO observations for an elapsed day. For the first ground station, it will connect to the satellite 4 times per day, and the second ground station will connect to the satellite 5 times per day, and the third 8 times per day, and Uganda ground station will connect 4 times per day. We deduced from that Northern Canada ground station can connect to the satellite 17 times per day, as for +5 +8 will be 17 times per day. And this column, the last column, is average daily duration for each ground station. In this slide, we can see International Space Station orbit path over the chosen countries. ISS observations for an elapsed day. In the first ground station, it will connect to the satellite 6 times per day, and the second will connect to 5 times per day, the third 3 times per day, and Uganda ground station will connect 4 times per day. So we can deduce that Northern Canada ground station will connect to the satellite 14 times per day. And the last column also is the average daily duration for each ground station. In this slide, we will see SSO path and ISS path over the chosen countries, and we must compare between them, and we must select which is suitable for our mission. We can choose between them based on which has more encounters per day. As we mentioned before, access times for all ground stations in Canada per day for satellite or to a satellite in sun-synchronous orbit is 17 times per day, and in International Space Station orbit 14 times per day. So sun-synchronous orbit is better than International Space Station orbit at this point. Compare the Yellowknife Den station encounters in Northern Canada as a region of interest. Can you back the previous slide, please? In this slide, we can see that ISS, International Space Station orbit, doesn't cover the yellow knife den station, but the satellite can connect to it as the station is in the range of operation of the satellite in this orbit. And for SSO, Sun-synchronous orbit, it's clear that it's much better than International Space Station orbit, as it covers the yellow knife dens much better than it. The third one is concerning the power budget for both orbits. Concerning the power budget, we created the power budget for a 17 event orbit, and its duty cycle was about 9%. And since we gave a high margin in the power budget, so both orbits are available for our power budget. We deduce from these three comparisons that SSO orbit is better than ISS orbit. Sun-synchronous orbit is better than International Space Station orbit for our mission. It's suitable for our mission. Thank you.
Now we're going to talk about launch providers. As we had some previous talks from Astris, the French company before, we chose them as our launch provider and insurance company. Next. Next. Can you hear me now? Okay, so for our launch providers, we chose Astris, the French company, which we had some previous talks from before. We chose them as our launch provider and insurance. Next, the contingencies and margins. We made our calculations based on contingencies and margins. First, the contingency is the difference between the maximum expected value and the best estimate value. But the margins are the maximum expected value, the difference between the maximum expected value and the max possible value we calculated from the contingency. So we used margins and contingencies in our following calculations to leave nothing for future surprises. First, I'll start by the power expenditure. The following table shows the total power expenditure for our project. First, for example, the OBC in Eurosat, which is our onboard computer provided by the company in Eurosat. We made a contingency rate of 5%. So the nominal usage we have is 1.3 watts. And after we add the contingency is 1.37 watts. And that's available at 100% duty cycle, as we expect our onboard computer will work 100% of the time. For example, the LoRa transceiver, which is a low power, high range wireless communication protocol, we set a contingency rate of 20%, and it works at a rate of 30% duty cycle, which means it works 30% of the total time, which is a little bit high, but we made that to prevent any future surprises about the power expenditure. The total power margin, the total plus the margin is 3.92 watts, which is shown at the bottom right corner. Next is the power generation. We have two sources of power generation. The first one is the electrical power system provided by EnduroSat. The expected nominal usage is 20.4 watts, and we expect a duty cycle of 100%. That means that it will be working 100% of the time. We put a contingency rate of 5%, and by using these calculations, the nominal usage plus the contingency factor is 19.38 watts. Our second source of power is the solar panels. The best case duty cycle is 100%, and the worst case duty cycle is 85%. We add a contingency rate of 10%, and the nominal usage is 2.3 watts. And after using the previous numbers for calculations, the total nominal usage plus the contingency rate and the duty cycle is 2.07 watts. From our calculations, the surplus power or the power generation nominal usage, which is the difference between the power generated and the power expenditure, is negative, which is shown at the first column, which is negative 0.1597 watts. And that's because of the high margin and the high contingency rates we used for the wireless communication protocols like the wireless transceiver and the ultra high frequency protocols, as these use the most power in our systems, and we put a duty cycle of 30%, which is actually isn't real, as it won't be even working 30% of the time. And because of the high margins we put, the surplus power became negative, which means that the power expenditure is more than the power generated. But we expect that that won't really happen. Now, according to our next, the power budget for the sensor suite, the sensors we're going to use, we took into consideration the time which the sensors will be working, active, and the powers that will be in idle mode. For example, in the nominal power draw in the first column, calculates the power used for each sensor during its idle mode, which is not really working. We put a contingency rate of 20% for the first one, for example, and the range lies from 20% to 30%. Next, we is in the fourth column is the peak power draw, which is the power which the sensors draw when they are working. Most of the sensors will work from a duty cycle of 10% to 40%. So we took in consideration that, for example, the 10% peak duty cycle corresponds in a nominal duty cycle of 90%, which is the complement of 10%, that it will be idle for 90% of time and 10% of time it will be working, and so on. The total with margin is shown at the bottom right corner, which is 1.19 watts. Next, we'll continue.
Okay, considering that we are talking about two completely different areas, we've reviewed the recommended operating temperatures of the ground sensors and compared them with the average temperatures in Northern Canada and Uganda. As shown in the table, the sensors might have a problem during some time of the year due to the very low temperature in Northern Canada and the high one in Uganda. However, the non-operating temperatures we believe can withstand these severe temperatures. So the maintenance and replacement costs must be kept in mind. The end of life of the satellite will be done by shutting down all the devices in a very determined manner until the satellite eventually falls in. While the ground segment will operate for a year after the decommissioning of the satellite, in case we need any data for experimental use, for example. The end of life analysis still needs to be done in the following phase. Okay, we think the requirements have covered all the key questions, but in this slide we ask some questions to ensure that Is our mission useful? Are our mission requirements complete? Have we discussed it appropriately? Okay, the next, if you have any questions, we will take it.
So, yeah, we do have some questions.
Yeah, we can answer them right away. You want to take them one at a time?
1 second, I'm just dealing with the feedback. Okay, so we had like a speaker, so. Okay, this should work now. Now there's no double me talking. So we had a few questions. The first one is back in the impact section from Derek, which is asking, he says, for the communications team, something like raw pollutant data may be useful for charity doing research, but not very useful for a person on the ground. Have you thought about the form that this data will take for the different stakeholders?
Yeah, it's a great question. My voice is clear or not?
Yeah, we can hear you.
The raw data can be directly used from charities, like we mentioned. Also, that raw data can to send to Uganda team. The team will translate it to figure and statistic. This statistic will be documented, and then the stakeholder have to access to it. Also, for normal people who need only to know about where is the places of the clean water, this will be indicated by a Uganda team. They will send them the places where the clean water. Are the question now clear or not? The answering now clear or not?
Yeah, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so the next few questions are back in the missions section. So if you guys
Actually,
wanna...
I have a question for the impact team.
Sure. Okay, go ahead. Another question.
So you presented that there were a lot of charities already tackling the problem in Uganda with related to water stuff. Does it make sense to coordinate? Would it make better sense to coordinate directly with one or a couple of charities to provide them with like the technical resources and have them facilitate most of the communication part with the community as they're already kind of established?
Is the question? Can you repeat it again because I didn't hear it?
Sorry. So my comment is that you mentioned that there are already a lot of communities that are tackling the water issue in Uganda. And would it make more sense to partner with one or a few of these charities to really tackle the communication side with the community members, and then have your guys focus more on the technical side to provide them the water quality data that they're looking for? Was that clear?
Actually, will provide them, like I said here, a data. This data will be taken to communicate with the area that is other social ways can be received. For example, if we use the radio as a main source to communicate with the community in Uganda, like I said, that 87% of Uganda can use the radio. What about the last 30%? As this way, I talk about we should use charities, which is main goal to communicate with people in those areas. So charities will provide him the data which is be modulated after received from the satellite.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Are the question the answer is clean or not?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so we have, there are no more questions from other.
I have a couple of questions before we go to the technical piece.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I don't have the background of your project, but let me just ask you the two questions that I had in mind is the impact when you say the impact on the community and you're going to send data to the community. I'm just wondering, and I know that you talked about it a little bit in the last question, but so why a member of the community who struggle of finding clean water? I only have this source of clean water that I have to walk to 200 kilometers to find this clue. How are you sending me data about clean water will make any difference if this is the only water that I have? Like, I'm just, if you can talk about the impact, how you think it will impact the community. That's one question. The second question is how frequent the variation of the contamination of water. So are this data that you're going to measure changes every hour, changes by day, changes over a year? Like is because you say that you're going to send them alert. I'm just wondering, is this number changes all the time, or the contamination will stay the same for the whole year, or it will change by season? Do you have any sense of the variation of the contamination?
Start with answering the second question. The contamination in this area can change it from day, or can change it from hour to hour. So, but when we talk about the new updated data, the satellite make 60 rounds around the Earth every day. This data will be updated every 2 hours or every 3 hours. That's about the second question. First question, what is the impact in this area? If they need to walk for 6 hours to 7 hours to get the water. That is the question?
Yeah, I mean, let's say I'm living in Uganda and I have to walk for 10 kilometers to clean water. Me receiving a message saying that the water is not clean, or the clean water is 200 kilometers doesn't change anything, right?
Yeah, actually, that doesn't change anything, but it changes the overview, or that empowers the community that in this area we have struggling with these issues. So the government should be face these issues, like making water pipes, for example, to send the water to this area. Also to help the government to know where is the clean water. This clean water will be sent to the community and at this area.
Okay. Thank you.
So the main purpose of that to empower the community at those struggle area.
Okay.
Thanks.
Any other questions for impact? Okay, so can we have the presentation with the missions requirements open to slide 78, please? Okay, that works too. So Alex had a question about the rationale for verifying FUN-0011 during flight rather than during design and analysis.
Yeah.
So you guys can answer that. So what is
during the flight test, we thought that we could verify it by receiving a dummy packet from the satellite. And since we are doing a flight test, it might be helpful to keep this in mind. A dummy packet would be like more of a false information or dummy information that we might use to make sure that this time that the satellite will be still deorbiting. Well, just a second. You're talking about function.
So the requirement FUN-0011, correct?
Yeah, so the ground stations units
no, it would be for the mission requirement.
The mission requirement.
And the question behind it, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex, but is leaving the analysis until leaving the verification until in orbit is a very late time to do it. So what could be done pre-launch? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, that's kind of my concern, right? And what Yosef said about sending a dummy packet like that makes sense to validate the system is actually functional when you power up in orbit. But in terms of actually verifying, validating the requirement, I would be reticent to have a team say, "Oh, we'll do it in flight," because once it's in flight, it's up there, right? So how do you plan to validate this requirement before?
Yeah, we will take it through the unit tests and the flight tests first. But since a flight test will be in action for some of the requirements, we plan to do these requirements more be assertive, so that they are operating functionally. I thought you were talking about the sending the data in CSV files, right? This requirement.
That was a different question. It was just more of a comment than a question for the CSV files.
Yeah. So like the CSV files, yes, I know we are going to test it, of course, through analysis and design. But since we will be doing a flight test, it wouldn't harm us that we can use a dummy packet to as more of to be assertive that this requirement is fully operational. To know from the beginning of the test. Yeah.
Awesome. So next question in the chat is from Derek again, saying, to clarify, the average daily duration is the sum of all of the daily events, or are these durations per event?
Yes, the average duration is the average of the durations of all the events during one day. So, for example, we have 4 events in the Kiwatin station. We took the average of the 4 events and put it in the table.
Okay.
Per event.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Again, next question: has a trade study been considered for a small constellation? 2 or 3 sats may increase coverage while meeting other mission requirements.
Yeah, the trade studies were done as a comparison of the 2 orbits using 1 satellite. 2 or 3 satellites, of course, will increase the coverage, but due to our limited budget, we since this would be in the action, the operation or the mission itself includes only 1 satellite. So we didn't do it actually on 2 or 3 constellations, or 2 or 3 satellites, or a small constellation, I mean.
Okay, awesome. Now, the last thing that we have is a comment saying, note that the average range is about the temperatures, is exactly that, an average. There are commonly periods of a week or 2 throughout winter that will go down to -30, -40, or colder, especially in northern Canada.
Yeah, actually, we found out that some of these equipment or some of these electronic packages will not be available in the extreme weather conditions in Canada. So we decided that we can turn them off since their non-operating temperatures. Their non-operating temperatures is far behind this. This is the operating temperature. It will withstand the cold weather, but of course non-operating, which would affect the mission. So this is something that we can flag for the preliminary phase. They can induce some designs or some mission or some ways to protect the equipment from these extreme weather conditions while keeping them operational at the same time.
Awesome, that sounds good. Any other questions or comments from other people? You can always feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I got one.
Yeah.
So when you guys compared orbits, one was an ISS orbit, one was a sun synchronous orbit. Is the ISS able to launch CubeSats into a sun synchronous orbit? And if it's not, then what is is there a big cost difference between getting a launch provider that can do polar orbits versus, or a sun synchronous orbit versus the ISS?
Actually, we consider that we would be a secondary payload on a mission, that they would eject us at 480 or 490 kilometers. But the real difference between both orbits weren't in the total cost and the budget. The ISS orbit itself couldn't cover northern Canada, much like the SSO orbits. Like we can see here in the Yellowknife Dean station, the number of events is only 3, which doesn't provide actually global coverage. But in the SSO orbit, it provides 8 events and maybe more if we use more satellites like the Comet. It would provide more of a frequent coverage. Does that answer your question?
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Awesome. So, if there are any other questions, comments? No? Okay. I think it's safe to move on. Carry on.
All right, I guess some of the project management would take on the share screen.
Yes, I have been taking the share right now.
So our project management team is responsible for developing the schedule plan. We did develop the work breakdown structure by adding in more detail than last year's. And also our role is to ensure that the assigned tasks are completed on time. We also did an update on the preliminary budget compared to the last year. Next. For work breakdown structure, we used NASA's standard facing system. The other team already explained a few details, so we will focus here on the timing. Our water mission divides into 2 areas, formulation, which is concept development, and preliminary design. These are phase A and B, which together takes about a year, mostly for the preliminary one. The second area, the implementation, which takes about 5 years total. The final design should be fabricated by the end of the year 2. Then in about 18 months period, the system will be assembled and launched, after which the operations and sustainment will take place. At the end of the stage, phase E, our work on or our program will be kind of over, but the mission will carry on for 2 more years as we hand off to the community in the final phase, phase F. Next. Starting with the updated work breakdown structures in the 4 years, which will be explained in a more detail later on. The first year is for the relations building, the next year is for training community, and the third year for the assembly and the launching preparation, which, as you can see, contains work packages such as the assembly, testing, preparation for launch and licensing. The fourth year for operations, which contains commissions, community handoffs, and lessons learned. As I said, this will be explained in later. Okay, so to make it easier to track the whole work packages, we used a numbering system. This 6-digit number have the first digit for the number of the year, the second one for the main work year, the third for the task, and the last 3 digits for the subtasking. You will notice the work breakdown structure chart progress, which will be in the upper left corner for the next couple slides. Next.
Okay, as mentioned, in each of these, there are some processes that must be done. And if you look at this slide at the upper left of it, you can see a mini chart of the work breakdown structure that contains the 4 years of the project. And of course, in the upcoming slides, we are going to explain each portion of it. But this mini chart just help you to track with us where we are in the work package structure. And at the end, you will see this chart, but more bigger. So if you look back to the bigger and colorful chart, this is exactly phase A, or the first year of the project. And so it contains a phase of some processes, and I'm going to mention them in the upcoming slides. So if you go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Here we can see that we start by establishing some communications with the interested communities, and these are the research and contact communities, as well as the educational ones. Also, we need to guide the conversation, and for this, we can assign a good facilitator to do that. And for sure, we can't forget the side that is related to training our team. And if we come to the next slide. Okay, we need now to measure and report what is called SDG impact, that is Sustainable Development Goals, and mainly related to social and environmental impact. And we can use a tool to accomplish that. Also, there is issue related to like making effective decisions through some sub-level stages, including determining priorities and analyzing alternative solutions. And of course, we need to assign things that we need like a positive impact on. For example, to ensure the spacecraft re-entry at the end of life, as well as its performance. Next slide. Okay, here we are in the final stage of only phase A of the first year of the project. And in this, we need to finalize issues in concept design. That is, we need to finalize what we call the country-based sensor. And this is through identifying the physical and environmental conditions in each country. And that was the work breakdown structure for phase.
So now I will talk about phase B, which is about achieving transparency for the project. And the transparency here, we divided it into 5 parts. The first thing is mission analysis and trade studies. And this is achieved by implementing the requirements specification and setting good and transparent engineering budgets. And carry out mission analysis and mission architecture correctly. The second part is about the design, and it's about an accurate preliminary design of the project in its earlier stages, and its fulfillment of the program specification. And then test it in all stages, such as unit testing and system testing. The third part is the V&V approach, or verification and validation approach. And these are independent procedures that are used together for checking that a product or a service or a system meets requirements and specifications and that it fulfills its purpose. And this is achieved by support equipment correctly and testing. The fourth part is impact-based process implementation, which is done by the impact team by impact processes, such as country selection and so on, and the impact tools and the reflection feedback. The fifth part is community engagement. This is achieved by information sharing with users and transparency with them, and create a dialogue and active listening by getting feedback and answering all possible questions and establishing a good relationship. And here we finished the phase B, and we will talk about phase B next slide with Abdurrahman Rida.
Hi everyone, I am Abdurrahman Rida, and I'll walk you through phase C for year 2, which is about collaboration and training. You can see how much we have updated this part from last year, especially in sub-level terms. You can see how much we got in depth in this part. We've divided the collaboration into 4 main parts: the mission design, the project management, community training, and test planning. For the mission design, and according to NASA's documents, we divided it into 2 main parts: the space segment and the ground segment. For the space segment, which is primarily the satellite itself, it contains all systems like power system, communication system, structure, the altitude control system, the payload, and we have concentrated on 3 main things in all these systems, which are finishing the design, procuring each system, and unit level testing. As for the ground segment, we have focused on 2 main parts: sensor ground segment and command and telemetry ground system. It enables us to manage to manage the spacecraft and the distribution of data and telemetry among interested parties on the ground. As for the project management, like any other project management team, we have focused on managing the budget and procuring supports, risk management, quality management, and of course, having alternative plans in case of any error. For community training, as the impact team said, we will focus on training the community for decision making and training the decision team to support the decision making. Then we will create the infrastructure and develop the decision making processes. And then we could share the experience with the community. And for test planning, we should study each test procedure in details and then buy the test equipment and test the test equipments and configure management for the test. Then we can prepare validation matrices for test procedures and then check the test flow, which is the most important part to see that see if we have achieved our results and to achieve our maximum results that we need. And that's it for this part. And next will go Ahmed Magdi.
Hi everyone, I am Ahmed Magdi. Now for the third year mission, it is NASA Phase D that assumed to last for 18 months. There is a stage of preparing for assembly and launching, and it consisted of a basic set of sub-stages, assembly and testing and launch preparation, training for performing the ongoing operations and launch contracts and licensing. First, space segment assembly, and it includes the main structure assembly and the power system and the attitude controller and the antenna insulation. And finally, fixing the payload. Second, definitely, testing should be made to ensure successful launch and operation, such as vibration and the mechanical and the thermal and the communication control test. 3. Now for the launch, we fit launch parties, have the right interface to launch vehicle, and finally shipping to the launch site. These 3 steps actually need well-trained staff, so a training schedule and training contents preparation, as well as ensuring that concepts are understood, will be required. Training contents may include how assembly and the testing and the pre-launch preparation are performed. Finally, actually, the launch process requires some contracts and licensing, such as launch data and launch cost and location assignment. And the next slide, Haitham will complete.
So for our phase E, operation phase, it's divided to various work packages, such as commissioning, which includes ensuring that we meet our requirements, such as ensuring that the installation aligns with the documents, that we meet our goals, the efficiency of operations, and so on. Also, the operation package or task, which divides into 2 subtasks, the ground operations, such as mission control, maintaining the flight and ground software, and data validation and processing. The next one is flight operations, which includes the trajectory monitoring, instant decision making, and so on. Then the third task or package is community handoff. This includes providing assistance, equipment, information, and the means of communication. Final package is the lessons we learned from this mission. Next. And this is the whole work breakdown structure. As you can see, it's pretty complicated. Next.
We will now talk about our preliminary budget. The project management team updated the costs of each component from last year's documentation according to this year's current prices. We use websites such as CubeSat Shop and Arduino Sensors website. In addition, for the components with no available online prices, inflation was taken into account, where we multiplied by 1.02 for components where we couldn't find prices online for. In budget estimation documented PDF, we attached the link to each component to have a better access to prices, specifications, and descriptions, of course. First, this is the cost of the space segment, such as the 1U chassis, antennas, solar panels, filters, and etc. For the maximum expected cost, we assigned a contingency for each component that varied between 20 to 25%. It is also worth noting that space segment labor cost is zero because students are space segment manufacturers. Testing is also considered free as its cost will be covered by industry partnerships. And as mentioned earlier by Impact Team, that we chose to extend our mission to Uganda. Thus, our ground segment is divided into two segments, in Canada and Uganda. In Canada, it includes sensors as thermometers, colorite sensor, turbidity sensors, blue-green algae, and etc. And in Uganda, it's almost the same sensors, but a water runoff sensor is added. Also, contingency varies between 20 to 25% for the ground segment. Ground segment building and testing costs, labor costs, as well as land costs are sponsored by government and charities. This is the budget of other components such as lithium-ion rechargeable batteries, edge control, and etc. The payload SMS ground communication costs consists of the ultra-high frequency antenna, high power amplifier, and of course the Arduino rotator. You can turn over. We now present the command and data handling budget, followed by community training costs from and to communities. And it includes transportation, flight, food, and housing. In Uganda, the costs are calculated for training for Ugandans and having one Canadian trainer. And of course, online training will be conducted as much as possible to minimize our costs. Also, the food, transportation, and housing prices are much lower in Uganda. For the communication, you can turn over the page. For the communication and feedback, the website for the domain and the host cost is about $9.5 per month. There's something that I forgot to say, that all prices are in the US dollars, all the shown prices. For the communication and feedback, this is the cost that should be taken from our budget. For the launch cost, as previously mentioned, we are considering Astrius to be our launcher. Astrius charges $10,000 per kilogram, and our CubeSat is almost 1.25 kilogram. Thus, the expected cost is $12,500 US, adding a contingency of 100% and 20% margin, thus makes it a total of $30,000. Finally, this table compares the cost breakdown between the last year and this year, 2022. We found some components with better prices, some components remain the same, and of course, some components, their prices went higher. There is a huge difference in the launch cost. Probably last year they chose a different launcher, but as previously mentioned, Astrius focuses on launching nanosatellites and CubeSats that fits perfectly to our requirement. And also the bar chart also illustrates the cost of each segment. Next, Mohammed will dive us through the risk assessment. These are the notes which I previously mentioned according to each segment.
Okay, now it's time for risk assessment. There are many risks associated with this mission. So to facilitate visualization here in slides, we have just taken 5 risks that are associated with the management problems. So let's start with the first risk. We have phases abstraction. This may happen due to any closure, such as coronavirus pandemic or monkey's disease that is spreading nowadays. And the consequences actually will be mission delay. So this actually has a little bit high risk. And simply it can be mitigated by dependence on online work when it is possible. Even if there is some on-site work required, we can just assign one person to work by himself and just make online meeting with his colleagues and open the camera so everyone can discuss on the on-site work. The second risk is about the higher inflation rate that we are focusing nowadays. This actually will cause costs fluctuation as well as inaccurate estimation of the costs. Unfortunately, the probability is a little bit higher for that risk, and severity is something that is moderate. So the overall risk may be considered as high risk. To mitigate this risk, we can buy all components that we are sure about as early as possible, and we can set higher contingencies for those products that are we are not sure about that we need or something. For the third risk, we that may be associated with the sponsors withdraw from funding the mission. This actually may be a huge problem because will finally lead to mission cancellation, because the overall mission is fully dependent on the funding of this mission. But fortunately, it has a little bit probability. So with the high severity, we can, when we mix both of those probabilities and severity, we may have a moderate risk. But anyway, to mitigate this risk, we can provide a persuasive report to those sponsors, so they feel safe to fund our mission. The fourth is about severe deviation from timeline. It is actually always happening for all projects nowadays, and exactly will cause loss of trust and so on. The probability and severity of this risk is high, so the final risk rank is a very high risk. But this can be solved by, at the beginning, we have to perform a well-studied timeline and well-studied tasks so that we can set our timeline precisely, and we have also avoid getting too busy in our timeline. Finally, as Dr. Hussam asked about, the communities may no longer need to the mission. This actually means that the mission is useless and will not continue. So this risk may be very high risk, but has a little severity, has a little likelihood or probability, and can be considered moderate. But to mitigate this risk, we can not start the mission unless we ensure that those communities really need this mission, and we have not started the mission unless we have an agreement with those communities and with the president of those communities. So yeah, this is about the risk assessment. The next slide is just to set the risks we had in the last slide. When we move to the right, it is a higher severity, and when we move upper, we have a higher likelihood. Those risks that we have discussed, here is high risk and here is lower risk. This just to better visualize the risks. Now, all the previous data mentioned in this presentation was about how we will manage the project for the 4-year program. But now let's talk about how we managed the 3-week training program, which is our program right now. First of all, this is the timeline that we have provided at the mid of the 2nd year. It lasted till yesterday. All of tasks are performed online on time. There is a little bit deviation from the expected task, but everything seems working well. For the attendance during the 3 weeks, in the first 2 weeks, it seems that all teams are attending, have attendance hours with equal values. A little bit deviation from other teams, but seems equal. But for the third week, we have just taken the first 2 days of the week, so we can note that hours are low, a little bit lower here. But anyway, they are seem have the same number of hours. About 600 of hours during the 3 weeks. So this actually very huge number of hours. Okay, we almost finished, but this slide just show you how the 3 weeks content have been divided. About 50% of the time was for lectures and training hours. It also include the check-in and check-out times. About 42% was for teamwork, and the rest for Asterios hours, the French company of the launch, and about 3% absence, and about 1% for external meetings of the if the team hours is not is too small for us. Anyway, we have reached the recommendations. We are almost finished. We recommend other team. We recommend the next teams of if anyone will complete this project to make a precise study on the overall tasks of other teams. This will actually help in the work breakdown structure and even in preparing the timeline. And we also recommend that it's better to set a detailed schedule or timeline for the work packages that we have discussed earlier in at the beginning. But unfortunately, we have not enough time to do so. So it's recommended for other teams if they will take this project. That's it we have today. It's a pleasure if anyone has a question. Feel free to ask.
Yeah, we actually have 2 questions. So if we go back to the breakdown of the structure, like that big chart with the different levels. I don't remember in phase B is what we're looking.
Phase B? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So the question I have here from Alex is, I'm a little confused by the choice of breakdown. Could you clarify how design, testing, and other technical work after requirement definition falls under the trust building with communities?
Yeah, those communities have the right to ensure that our work is going well, and it will not. There is no failure will happen during the mission. So that is why we have included those work packages inside or under the trust plan for the mission, just to make those society feel that we are safe and this project is safe and will meet their requirements.
Alex, does that
Okay.
answer?
I'm still more leaning towards that this would be a task that would fall under communication, because if there's no expertise, the communities can't really help with, if they're going to design the comm systems, well, they don't know about electronics and all these things. I agree with you that, however, it's important to keep them in the loop about how things are going, if there are any changes in the design that will affect the outcome of the mission. But in terms of, maybe I'm splitting hairs here, but in terms of the work breakdown structure, that doesn't really make sense to me. But I understand where you're coming from, where the intent is.
Yes, great.
Yeah. Now the other question in the chat is, how do you, and this is about the 3-week breakdown, correct, Alex?
Yes, that's right.
So how do you anticipate that this breakdown will map to the bigger project? So the 4-year project, correct?
That's precisely it.
So
we actually depended also on the last year work, and we have added some information just to ensure that our program will continue during the 4-year program.
Does that answer?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Okay.
Ian.
Yeah.
Ian has some questions. Yeah.
Okay, so with your risk assessment, maybe this is just a comment. Your like the sponsors withdrawing funds. So risk number 3. You had it as a likelihood of 1. And I think given the situation where we're doing this pilot program with the group in Egypt not being here in Canada, I think maybe as a casualty of sponsorship, likelihood could be higher than that. And it also brings me to your risk assessment matrix, your risk matrix, where it seems like everything falls in the very likely or severe range. It's in the kind of the reddish, orange-ish area. So maybe as you guys are wrapping up your project, think about how you can how you can convince your stakeholders that this is a viable project, or find ways on how to mitigate your risks to get it into the yellow and greenish areas. Thanks.
Yeah. Actually, those risks are not here on
I think
green
it's
area.
out for a little bit. Do you want to repeat that?
Is my connection unstable?
A little bit, but you're back now. So do you want to try that again?
Okay. I said that actually we have just mentioned 5 risks out of many risks that we have not mentioned, but other risks may fall on the green or yellow area that are may not need a mitigation plan. But for the high risks that we have mentioned, we have already mentioned a mitigation plan or action to be followed just to mitigate it. Does that answer the question? Or
yeah, that's fair. It's fair that you presented the most riskier things on a short time scale. Thanks.
Yeah. Now we do
Thank
have,
you.
I think, one more comment in the chat. Yeah, it says very interesting angle. Could be interesting to consider managing this project with education opportunities for the communities. Awesome. Yeah. Any other questions from anyone else?
Yes.
Sam, do you have any questions? Oh, Sam left? Okay. So Sam's not here anymore. No? Okay, I think we are done, folks. No more questions. Friends?
Yeah, so I'm just going to say thank you to all the folks who have attended and provided inputs. I think that was really helpful inputs for the team. So thank you for your time this morning. Much appreciated. The documents and the YouTube video will be posted to the team website later today or tomorrow. So if you want to dive in later on, feel free. But thanks ever so much for coming out. As for the team, huge thanks for the work today. That was an excellent mission requirements review presentation. We will take a short break after this to give you a chance to recover from the presentation, and then we'll pick up again in a bit to wrap out the day. So it's 11:16. Let's take a decent break. We'll come back at 11:45 back into the usual Zoom room. So thanks everybody. And just to flag for those who've joined today, this team is a group of students who are all over Egypt who haven't met before the last 2.5 weeks. They only met 2.5 weeks ago online. And there are many different subjects that the students are studying. There's a mixture from software, computer, navigation, and space and aerospace. So this is an area that many are exploring for the first time. And I'm really pleased with what the team's been able to achieve. And thank you all for your comments and feedback. On that note, we will close out the day. And for the folks in the program, we will regroup in the Zoom room at 11:45.
Yeah. Good job, everyone.